Buenos días a todos y les pedimos que no se olviden de poner sus micros en mute. Vamos a comenzar en unos minutitos. Gracias por estar con nosotros el día de hoy.
Buenos días todos. Thank you. So today we are going to look back just to answer some questions to start with that hopefully I can answer from yesterday. So bear with me. I'm not sure that I can answer them all fully, but I will do my best. So there was a couple of general questions about the differences between mentoring and coaching and tutoring. So I wanted just to pick that up and say, for me, and in terms of looking at this, tutoring I think is limited to academic knowledge. In general, it's limited to the job or the research, or if it's a student, to the academic knowledge. And coaching is relatively short in time, or it has a limited time, and it's developing a particular skill. So you may have 3 sessions with a coach. Let's say you've got someone, I'm sure we've all had this, who's very troublesome in your team. And you may need some help to manage that situation, and the coach will give you some ideas and strategies. Whereas mentoring in the context that we're talking now is much more general. It's about your career development. It includes aspects of your personal life. It's not just the current job, so it's over a longer time frame. So I hope that it explains the concept that we're working on today and this week. Someone has asked about whether it's voluntary or if it's institutionalized. I think there are positives and negatives of both of those. And that's something that actually might come out from our speaker later on, who's going to be from the University of Washington and speaking about a mentoring scheme on the ground. And if it doesn't come out in that, I think that's a good question that we would be able to ask him from a practical point of view. And there's another question about there were several questions from people about the numbers of mentors. This is a much more in-depth relationship than a tutor group, where you might have a group of 15 students, but for this, I think it's hard to do more than 2 or maybe 3 it depends on your other workload as well. So I think really there can only be, ideally I would say 2. I've been involved in some schemes where there's only been 1, so it will depend. But I think it's a much more in-depth relationship. And often there's a coordinator, and that might be within your institution or across institutions, who might help manage that process as well. But those pairs of mentees and mentors. Someone asked me, could there be a mentor of a mentor? And I think that's a great idea. Someone who's got a lot of experience of mentoring would be able to help and mentor the new mentors. And that would be a little bit like supervision sessions for psychologists. So where you have a working psychologist dealing with clients, they would also have their own psychology sessions with someone. And they would be that kind of system, I think, that would be useful. It may be that there's a pool or a group of experienced mentors who've got experience of mentoring, who have different skills and experiences. So how to manage childcare when you're a pressurized researcher, for example, how you do that return to work, how you juggle responsibilities. It may be something that there are people who have life experience who can help with that if you're faced with problems. That's just an example. I think that sort of system is great as well. And there were lots of questions about managing differences and barriers, and hopefully that will be answered as we go through today, where one of the later discussions will be about the different phases of mentoring and what happens when it goes wrong, or what happens if it's difficult, and some hints and tips around that. So hopefully some of that will come out as we go later through this day. I think that's more or less all of them in groups, the general areas that are covered, other than the ones that I already answered yesterday. So I hope that helps. We'll try and pick up some more of these again if you have other questions today. With the translation and working backwards and forwards, I hope that we're able to do that. So going on then to session one, we did the introduction. And we looked at emotional intelligence. And today we're moving on to session two, which is looking at communications in the context of mentoring. And the things I want to learn or go through today are the concept of understanding effective communication and within a mentoring context, and how to use active listening as opposed to just ordinary listening, how to understand how to manage difficult conversations, and some tips and techniques to help with that. And also, one of the sessions that I want to do, which will be in the group work, is looking at the changing role within higher education. We're all being forced to use digital, online, phone much more at the moment, and we don't really know when that will change. And perhaps we will retain aspects of this going forward anyway, particularly if we're trying to work with people in remote areas of our country or internationally. So I know that we have a great deal of expertise, so I want to gather some of that expertise, not just about how one would have a meeting remotely or online, or teach online, but how you could do these sensitive one-to-one meetings where you're actually using a screen, which is not, it still has some distancing, and it has a slightly different feeling than using one-to-one in a room facing each other. So that's the brief run through for today. So we're going to do effective communications to start. There will be a short break, then we'll do some group work again, and then come back and get some feedback and some summing up for that. Difficult conversations, and then we have our invited guest speaker, Professor Joseph Zundt from the University of Washington, which I think is going to be really interesting. Hopefully we'll get some time to get him to answer some questions as well, and then finish for the day. So I'll leave that one. My George Bernard Shaw quote, which I think is one of the things that we always have to check. Have we actually communicated or just think we have? So in English we have the 3 C's. It doesn't, I think, quite work in Spanish translation, although if someone can come up with a word for Animadora that begins with the letter C, perhaps I would be grateful for that. But I want to think about styles of communication and styles of how we communicate in these 3 different roles within mentoring. So I'm looking at in English anyway, consultant, counsellor and cheerleader. And on the consultant side, as a consultant, you may be a professor, a teacher, looking at techniques, communicating how to complete grant applications, how to look for promotion for that next career step. You may be a teaching role within that mentoring role. Or as a consultant, you may be an advisor in the terms of how best to tackle a problem, who to speak to in the department who can get something done, who's that technician in your lab who knows how to do that particular technique that you need. You maybe have that kind of advisor role as well. And as a consultant, you might be a role model. And I think that's a very key role of mentoring. You model that behaviour, you show that behaviour of professionalism and expertise within your subject. And so you can model professionalism and also success along the path of your own career. So that's my first C as a consultant. But the second C is as a counsellor. And one of the roles of a counsellor might be a guide, showing the way, helping to map out a career path. So it may be that part of your role is a guide. And as a counsellor, you definitely need to be a listener. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes people just need you to listen, a bit like our empathy cartoon from yesterday. Sometimes just listening will make people feel better, and they'll be able to sort their own problems out and work through their own problem and come to a conclusion. So being a good listener, an active listener, is really important. And then lastly, and I think as a counsellor, is the role of an advocate, to actively assist within the department, within your university, within the profession more widely, to shout loudly on behalf of your mentee. And it's someone that you can nurture, someone that you can bring along and will be the next generation, which will benefit your department, which will benefit you, which will benefit your institution. And then the last role is the Animadora, or we would say cheerleader. Again, promoting people's ideas, promoting their research, whatever research path that your mentee is on. Allow them or encourage them and promote them in terms of naming them on publications, doing some joint work and being active about that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in skills development tomorrow, how you'll go about arranging that and organising that. Or doing joint presentations in the days when we could attend conferences, maybe encouraging them to do a poster presentation and actively being that promoter and suggesting these different experiences. So that's one aspect of being a cheerleader. I think the other one is slightly to be a protector as well. So often a junior colleague can be caught up in, I'm not sure what the translation will be, but in busy work. So being seen to be working, but not there's work that gets in the way of their real role within the department. So you can sometimes help protect that and say, no, they need to be working on their work, and you can help them and how within the department to do that. And then networking, introductions. We all know that introductions are absolutely crucial within all sorts of careers, but I think in research more and more we have to work across institutions, across countries, and different aspects of science, and the interfaces between biology and computer technology, all these different networks that we can form in order to push forward scientific barriers and frontiers. So your job to be a cheerleader is to say, these are the important people. Go out of your way in meetings or within conferences again to actually make those introductions and explain, what your mentee does and why they're important and why their work is important. So there's lots of different roles and different styles of communication. And how do we make sure it happens? Are we speaking the same language? Some of the hints and tips and some of the ways that we can communicate effectively. Because giving instructions and saying, okay, well, now just get on with it. I think you need to do this, that, this, or I think you should do that, is not enough. We need to really effectively communicate. When we have this nurturing relationship, when we have this mentoring relationship, which is wider than just being a boss or a leader. And I think there really are 4 points that I'd like to cover. 4 points for effective communication. So one is the active listening. One is questioning and how to go about that. And then the 2 different aspects which link together, I think, which are challenge and support. You have to, as a mentor, you have to be prepared to challenge, but also support, and challenge in a constructive, supportive way. And then I think the 4th point I'd like to cover in this is that it's a 2-way process, this communication, and it has to be led by the mentee. And that's one area that we'll come back to, because that can be difficult, that can pose difficulties in terms of breakdown of communications. And we'll come back to that later on. So I think I want to cover these 4 points, and I'm going to cover those in a little bit more detail. Excuse me a moment. Okay, so point number one within effective communication is this active listening, where we give our full attention, where we seek to understand the words that people are using, where we seek to understand the intention behind those words as well as the words themselves. And that we also try and understand the feelings behind that as well. So it's a very rounded way of listening, not just superficially hearing the words, but thinking about the intent and thinking about the feelings. And we know that there are different ways of hearing. We have the noise of the world, everything that's going on. And within that, you may pick up on a conversation. And you need to then think about listening with interest to that conversation. And within that, then the very active listening, which goes beyond, is a nested relationship between different types of listening. And active listening will look at what's really being asked, what's really needed or wanted, what's the root of a problem. And there are different stages to that. It's beyond the pleasantries, beyond the hello, how are you, all those things. And you will need, if you are mentoring someone, to have some degree of encouragement for that, because often people will find that difficult to be open to someone who's their senior. They maybe find it difficult to really come across and be open about their needs and what they need at that point. So you need to encourage that communication, and it's a 2-way communication. And we're always trying to clarify the points, and then demonstrate that you've understood by reflecting back. So you might be having a conversation and you will summarize very quickly, just to make sure that they know that you understand, that they know you're listening. So as I understand it, your additional roles in the department are getting in the way of your primary research. This is something that we're going to help you sort out. If that very clarity that you can see and that you can reflect back to whoever you are listening to. And showing empathy that we saw in the cartoon with Brené Brown yesterday, about the difference between sympathy and empathy, but a deeper understanding. And that will then develop rapport. And that takes time. So mentoring is not for a term or a semester, and it can be a longer term relationship, and probably needs to be, because this time bringing on the next generation, and in the context that we're talking, bringing on women into more senior roles does take time. And so we're going to use our voices, we're going to use our eyes and our ears and be totally engaged. I would encourage people to be turning their phones off and turning their emails off, and have that meeting. So you are totally, for that 1 hour or half an hour or however long that meeting takes, that's your job for that time. And you do that with your body language, your posture, your head nodding, smiling, all of those things that you would do to show that you are actively engaged, and keep the focus on driving the conversation forward so that you're not wasting that time. It's a responsive relationship, and can be valuable, very valuable for both sides. All those little small encouragements. I see, yes, go on, yeah, okay. All those little encouraging words to get people to talk. So that's the sort of first part, I think, of active listening. And then we would go perhaps on to questioning. So there are different forms of questioning. So perhaps to satisfy curiosity, but also clarifying, always clarifying, making sure that the questions are focused, so that you're clarifying what problems there are, how they might be able to improve, take things forward, to look at possible alternatives. Questioning to check understanding, that you've got it right, that they understand, that you understand. And also to challenge any contradictions, that they say they're too busy, but you see them wasting effective time on things that are nice to do, but are not necessary. So helping them focus as well. And I think the questioning needs to be quite direct to move the discussion forward, because otherwise we can end up going round and round and round on the same points. So effective communication is good listening, but also good questioning perhaps as well. And I think this is the balance, the graph in the role between supporting and challenging. And we can look at point A on the graph, where it's boredom, it's stasis, it's not going to work, because you're just going to be stuck in that position. And we're trying within mentoring all the time to produce growth, and a rounded growth. So points A and B, I think A, there's sort of little support and little challenge. In point B, you're confirming, and it's not increasing people's knowledge or confidence and ability to grow within their role. Of course, point C is probably the worst of all worlds, that you've got too much challenge and very little support, and people will then tend to flounder or run away. So we aim to have this nice growth line, where we have a good balance between necessary support and necessary challenge. So I think this is a part of effective communication, about trying to not over support, but give the necessary support and enough challenge that people can grow within their role and take on more responsibility. And this is the true challenge of a mentor, to find that balance, I think. And that supporting that support and challenge it's a balance. It promotes growth. People need to be able to grow within their role, and it's an ever-changing balance. It will change over time, and there will be a lot of aspects to it, and at some point there will be great leaps and bounds, and sometimes you will feel like you will be going backwards, and I'm sure all of you have managed staff, but mentoring is a slightly different, is a very different relationship from managing, because you're trying to encourage people to take those next steps and think about their longer career path. And it's an active process as well. It has to be active, and it has to be back and forth between the mentor and the mentee to shape development. And in shaping development, it will then promote success. And this support and challenge balance between the two to lead to growth as a mentor is the thing that we strive for, is the best of all possible worlds. And it leads to a more productive team member within your research team or within your department. So we have this support and challenge. And the last point within this effective communication, I think, has to be two-way. It has to be a two-way discussion, but more importantly, it definitely, I think, it needs to be mentor-led. Mentee-led. I'm completely wrong. Mentee-led. And there are a number of reasons for that. That the mentee has to own the process. They have to own that process. Otherwise, the balance becomes the mentor is doing to the mentee, but the mentee has to own it. And it's part of your role as a mentor to start with, will be teaching that person to manage up, in effect. To manage expectations and to manage the mentoring process, almost to get what they need from it with your help and your guidance and your expertise. And as time goes on, the relationship becomes more of a balance. It also makes it easier in the process for the mentor if you can encourage the people that you mentor to take that initiative, to take on that process. So we're looking back over in terms of that sort of effective communication and effective listening. I'm so sorry about that. I had a cough. I didn't want to have a coughing fit. Oh yeah, it's better. Okay, so looking at this effective communications and the way of supporting a mentee, I think it's a much more intensive relationship than perhaps being an advisor or being a coach, because it is longer term, and so the balance between two people in that one-to-one mentoring relationship can be very strong and very powerful. There are also, of course, times when that goes wrong, and I will come back to that in the session later on, about how to put that right, hopefully, or even to decide, okay, this isn't working, and perhaps we need to move on. Someone might need something different from a mentor, other than what they're able to give at that time. As a anecdote, I've mentored several people in my team at the university, in my wider team. And one of the people that I've mentored, who I hope is going to join us, or at least virtually join us on Thursday, is someone that I didn't know for quite a long time that he was deaf or had very limited hearing. And he'd spent his whole life up until the age of 20 trying to cover up the fact that he was deaf. And through the so this was a mentoring process that became about him accepting that fact and using it and overcoming the fact that he could tell people that he was deaf, because it was just going to make his life so much easier. But it took me quite a long time of knowing him to actually get him to accept that and to use it as a tool and to make the most of his strengths, because he saw it as a complete disability and a downside. But having mentored him through the process, he accepted that he could not only effectively mentor other people with disabilities or without, but had a deeper understanding of some of the issues that people face. And he had spent such a long time covering those things up. Now, that's just a very obvious example. But it was only by really effectively listening and watching that I got him, and then having that mentoring relationship where he was able to trust to come up and to bring out some of those points, that he could then use his experience in the widest sense. And all the points of mentoring are to make sure that we are using everyone's skills to the best of their ability and encouraging those people to use their skills, and for the good of the research team, for the good of the institution, for the good of themselves in their careers and in their development. So there are lots of different examples, I think, of different types of mentoring, but it is a much more in-depth relationship when it's working well, and it's a longer term relationship of nurturing, supporting, but also encouraging and trying to get that balance between challenge and support, that graph where people can only grow if they can have that balance between the two. So I know yesterday we had some quotes from mentors, and so I've pulled out a few quotes from mentees from their experiences. So I'm just going to put those up there now and perhaps give you a few minutes just to read these. Okay, I'm seeing in the chat function again lots and lots of different questions, and so I'll try and take some time to look at these during the time that you will be doing some group work in 5 or 10 minutes time. It's fantastic to see such a lot of interaction, but my Spanish is not good enough to be able to pick this up straight away, so I will take some time to try and look at some of that as yesterday. I'm just screaming through. Okay, that's fantastic. And there's some really interesting research on mentoring. And hopefully you'll be able to follow some of that up, and I will be putting up some links when we produce the handbook at the end of this session, at the end of this week. A handbook will come out at some point, will come to you, and there will be some research and background on the positive benefits of mentoring as well. So I want to flag that up, because I know that For some people, they will know about mentoring or will have experienced this outside of Peru. But for some people, some of this will be very new in terms of this holistic mentoring. An example that I'd like to perhaps give is another person that I mentored extensively, and it was a mentoring relationship that went on for about 5 years. A mature student who had always been told that they could not access university, and so had no confidence that they could. And I mentored them as an undergraduate, actually. So these mentoring schemes can work at any level. I mentored him as an undergraduate over a long period of time, because he didn't think he deserved to be at university. And it transpired that he had no support from his home life as when he was at school. So he had left school with very little qualifications. I'm unsure about the Peruvian system, but within the UK, you can re-enter education as a mature student on a different basis, by an experience basis, which was how he had entered back in. But he had so much to offer because of his experience, but he had no confidence because he was surrounded by young people who had come straight from school and then into college and then into university, and he felt that they had that experience to know what they were doing, to understand about reading and writing essays and all of those other aspects. But within those 3 years of being the first 3 years of being an undergraduate, he was able to gain that confidence to be able to appreciate that his life experience meant that he didn't have to worry too much about all the things that young students were doing. He could focus on his studies, and he graduated at the end top of his class. On the point of when I first met him, he was going to leave university altogether. And he then went on to work at the Hadron Collider in CERN in Switzerland, and has a fantastic career in cutting-edge computer intelligence. And that would have been a skill that we would have lost. And I think that's something that we always have to bear in mind. I can be telling you very detailed processes and facts about how mentoring will work and how you will do this. But you have to have that enthusiasm to find those people that will really benefit from mentoring, and they will fly, as opposed to they will be the next generation who will make those fantastic discoveries, particularly, I think, for me as a scientist, particularly within the fields of science and medicine and technology. So although mentors sometimes think, this is extra work, why would I do this? The rewards that you get back are phenomenal, are huge. And to see your mentee grow and take on challenges and become independent is totally amazing. It's a fantastic experience. And as one of these quotes say, I wish I had, as one of the mentor quotes yesterday rather had said, I wish I had had a mentor when I was in my early career. So, where I just need to check at the moment. Okay. So at this point, we're going to have a short break. You've probably listened to me talking quite enough at the moment. I'm going to try and we work through perhaps some of the questions and see if I can pick up some themes that are coming through on the chat. But please keep putting them. Eventually, even if we don't answer them today, I'll try and answer some overnight and for tomorrow. And they will be picked up as I go on through the course. And they're really useful to see how people are thinking and some of the challenges and some of the positive thoughts that people have about the process of mentoring and how exciting it can be and how strong it can be and how it can improve that next generation coming through. So we'll have a 10-minute break. When you come back, you go back into the small group rooms again. It's a slightly shorter session, maybe 30, maybe 35 minutes. We can probably have a little bit longer, and then we'll come back as a whole group for some feedback. And today, I want to pick your brains really, because you are the experts. In terms of looking at this new way of working that we have, and not just in terms of teaching or in terms of holding an online meeting or training, but if you're thinking about having a mentoring session, one-to-one for an hour, let's say, with someone, some of the difficulties or some of the advantages that there might be in that one-to-one relationship. So there's a couple of short tasks. If we could get some discussion going, we're going to record the session, so we'll be able to get a transcript of it later, again for providing a report later on. And also I'm going to ask the facilitators to send me some notes of the key points that have come up during some of those discussions. So if we have a 10-minute break now, and then come back in and join your small group, and then we'll take it from that point. So thank you to everyone again. I'm really happy to see how much some of these questions are coming through, and I can see that there are questions that we will start to answer as we go through the rest of the day as well already. So thank you everyone. Get a coffee, have a quick break, and then 10 minutes and join your small group sessions. Thank you.
Deborah, should we start?
Okay. Is everything okay? You can hear me and you can see the screen, I hope.
Perfect. Perfect.
Brilliant.
No problem.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everyone for taking part in that. I've just made a few notes to consider. So in terms of working on the platform, there are always hiccups. So planning to be effective, you have a limited ability to read people's body languages, and sometimes we need to break the sessions up, which I hope we've tried to do for this session as well. Not everyone has a dedicated office at home as well, so it can be difficult difficult to read people's body language when you're in this situation. So I've just made a few notes really. If you were meeting one-to-one, are you going to use a video or not? And are you going to record or not? And what does that do to the nature of the discussion? Because normally if you were having a one-to-one mentoring discussion within a cafe or in a meeting room, you probably wouldn't record it. So again, it can be something that needs to be negotiated, and these are difficult times, as we all know, and things that we have to consider going forward. And it may be that those with learning differences or additional needs or disabilities find some of this difficult or more difficult not being in the same room, and trying to maintain those sort of standards. And it can make communication tense. It's easy to, or more easy perhaps, to misunderstand when we're trying to talk over this kind of distance, as I find out every day at the moment. And it feels more intense, and it feels more difficult to show that kind of engagement, I think. So if we're going to be doing mentoring on a system like this, which we may have to do from going forward from time to time, or maybe if we're remote because our work and our research takes us to different parts, then those are all some of the things that we might need to consider. So there have been lots of discussions in the chat about difficult situations and difficult questions that come up, different things that may come across in a mentoring meeting, and I'm not going to be able to cover all of those. But I think, let's think about if we think mentoring isn't working, and that really it comes under a couple of different things. Is setting the ground rules, setting the guidelines to be clear. You may need to revisit them. You may need to, and those guidelines might be that you have certain protected times that you expect that your mentor, unless it's your mentee, unless it's an absolute emergency, can't just come and knock on your door or contact you, or there will have to be some ground rules because you're busy working professionals. So you may need to set some guidelines, and that might be done in a mentoring scheme overall, or it may be something that you agree with your mentor about what works between mentor and mentee, about what works best for you in carrying out this relationship. If it isn't working out, it could be that there is a breakdown of trust, and you may be able to rebuild that. It can be an intense relationship, and that level of trust needs to be maintained and built. And that's why it is a longer and more supportive relationship than perhaps coaching. And so you may be able to rebuild it, but it's for mentoring to work well. There needs to be trust, and there needs to be openness between the two parties. And there are a whole number of things that can make that relationship break down or lead to difficulties. So there may be, for example, a problem that you don't know about, or there may be a problem that you know about, but it isn't being raised, and that can also be a tricky situation to be in. And the best advice I can always say is to be direct. And listen well. You need to sometimes cut through some of the difficulties that people have in expressing those problems. There may also be some difficulties of confidentiality that you are uncomfortable with. And those do come up as it is an ongoing relationship. It may be something that is discussed in a situation that you don't know enough about, or that makes you feel uncomfortable. And they may have been brave to raise that, your mentee may have been brave to raise it. So we need to try and use some empathy, that even if I don't know what to say, again, a bit like the cartoon with Brené Brown, sometimes the best response is, I don't know what to say about that, particularly if it's a personal difficulty. But listening can be enough, and having that empathy and that emotional connection has to work on both sides. Occasionally, there may also be safeguarding issues, and I don't know your systems in Peru, and I'm sure you all will, but there will sometimes be difficulties where you have to raise it and break confidentiality. So there are always those situations where, although the mentee and the mentor relationship is confidential, there are always those times where you may have to break that confidentiality for safety, for health and safety reasons. So there may be some safeguarding concepts that you need to. So I guess my job is I'm pointing out some of the difficulties because they do arise, and you are all senior people, I know, and I know that you will know some of this. But in my experience, they are rare, and the mentoring relationship is generally good and generally rewarding on both sides. I think this can be a difficult, and that's why I lead into this really, that it can go too far the other way, that you become too friendly and too cozy and comfortable in that relationship, so that you aren't, as a mentor, you aren't perhaps critical enough, and you're not pushing that growth and independence strongly enough towards your mentee. Or there may be changes within the department and within your team that have made the relationship different. The relationship at work might be different. So there are all these different things to consider when you're looking at a mentoring relationship. So it could be perhaps there are some phases, and I'm going to get onto that now. It may be time to end that particular phase or working with that mentee, and that will happen. But in my experience, as I say, I've mentored probably close to 100 people one way or another over the last 20 years, and very few of them end up in disaster. And it's a rewarding experience from both sides, I would say. So I'm just going to put this slide up about sort of some of the phases and give you some chance perhaps to read that, because there's a lot of information on here. And again, I just want to point out that most of this material will be combined into a handbook for you to have after this course. So we have these various phases, and they will vary from different types of relationship depending on where the mentor and the mentee are in their respective careers. If jobs change perhaps, or roles change, then some of the timescales may indeed change. But there's usually that initial point, which may take up to a year maybe to build up some initial rapport, where the mentor is respected for their skills and their knowledge, and the mentee is starting to be recognised and having some of the equipment, some of the skills to be respected in their junior role. And there's that initial phase, and then following that there will be the next sort of cultivation phase, and that often can last quite a long time. And again, every mentoring relationship will be different, but maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending on where people are within their career path. And that relationship develops slowly, and it deepens beyond perhaps where it might start with day-to-day and more work related to the wider aspects of people's lives and careers. At some point you will both probably decide, or it will become apparent that you need to start separating, because that relationship in a mentoring format is going to naturally come to a point, to an end, and I can't give you a precise guidelines for that. And the more you do this, and for those of you who've had mentors or have done any of this work, you'll know that there will come a point where independence has been encouraged, and people are moving away and not needing as much support. They may still come back to you occasionally, but there's a time to be moving away, to have some separation. And then lastly, you will try and redefine that relationship. And that, in my experience, is almost always friendly and colleagues and work colleagues, and that relationship will naturally transfer. Occasionally it becomes difficult, and that will depend on the department you're in and the individual. So you may just, it may be a relationship that runs its course and then ends. And there's no more to be got out of it. But in my experience, that is not normally the case, and people do keep in touch and become more friends and colleagues rather than that mentor-mentee relationship. So I'm just going to do a little bit on difficult conversations. I've noticed there are some questions coming up in the chat about how to have what difficult conversations that there might be. And these difficulties might be something that's coming from the department that you're in, might be something external, like the pandemic, for example, as we are at the moment, that the mentee is not pulling their weight, is not contributing, is falling behind. Or maybe you notice something about them, that their appearance has changed, that their timekeeping is bad. And so you need to tackle that and have those difficult conversations. And I'm sure most of you will have done this kind of thing before, particularly with students and colleagues. But it needs to, that meant, depending on where you are in the relationship, particularly early on, it can be difficult perhaps to meet those things head on. So I just wanted to quickly look at the Johari window, which many of you may be familiar with. So we have these things that we know that are known to you, to yourself, and things that are not known to you. And so we have blind spots. And so I think this area here is where most of the difficult conversations take place. So there are things that are apparent to you and other colleagues and cause friction perhaps, but which your mentee may not be aware of. And so those kind of difficult conversations need to be had, and need to be had quite openly and quite head on, because if you've done some of the groundwork for a mentoring relationship and build up some rapport, you will be the best person to help them through whatever problems and difficulties they may have. And so in those difficult conversations, I think definitely need to be direct and not beat around the bush, and not to challenge behaviours perhaps, but with support. And can you agree that there is a problem, and discuss potential solutions and set timeframes for action points? Those conversations are slightly different from your start as leaders of teams or leaders of departments. These are different conversations than you might have with those people that report directly to you. They may report to you, but they may not be. They may be someone that's in a department that's parallel to yours. And so these are slightly different conversations than this sort of hierarchical conversations that you might have within a team or within a department. There are all sorts of decision trees and things that you can use, and you can formalize this as well. And I know sometimes that's sort of useful in a way. So thinking about a process. An example, this is just a part of an example of a sort of a decision tree which can be useful and, as part of the University of California program. And this is something that they encourage to look at. If it's not working, why isn't it working? Is it something that your mentee is aware of? Have communications broken down? And if there is a breakdown, are they aware of it? It may be that they just are not aware, and so you have the sort of a tree that you can work down. So in some more formal schemes of mentoring, there are some very formal processes, but a lot of mentoring schemes are much more voluntary and slightly looser in terms of rules and processes. So I think it's useful to kind of think, can we repair that relationship? Can we move on? And sometimes you can't, but mostly you can. And if you've built up rapport and you've built up some degree of a relationship, then being able to work through quite systematically to put that relationship back on track and agree a change and get a good outcome is really important. And some of the best mentoring relationships tackle these kind of issues head on, and it's that tussle, that process that actually solidifies and makes that relationship very productive. Could be that there is some sort of blockage that they can't recognize, that your mentee can't recognize that there's a problem. And it may be that you need to then go on to other levels and work out why. And there may be genuine reasons why there are problems within the relationship. And at some point, it may be that relationship will need to change and move on. Maybe you've taken that person as far as you are able. But working through those blocks are generally, obviously, the most rewarding in the end, and getting a team to function well can help with that. There are probably some areas where mentoring is difficult and won't work. So we may need to have an intervention of a different type. So it might be that there is a particular skill that needs a more coaching approach. And we've talked a little bit about the difference between mentoring as a holistic, longer-term process and coaching for a specific skill. Mentoring might not work for that, and you may need to have a different approach or involve another member of your team. It may be that someone has a very different learning style, may have specific learning differences, so it may be difficult to have that one-to-one relationship. Whether, for example, someone that I've worked with has autism, and they're not very comfortable in that very close one-to-one role. And so you may need to think of other ways around. It might not be appropriate to have that in-depth relationship because they don't function in that way. So there are sometimes some clear cases where it just doesn't work or won't work, and you have to find a different way to approach encouraging their development as far as you're able. If another difficulty where there might be is where there's an existing relationship. If there's an existing hierarchical relationship that's very strong, it might be very difficult to take on a mentoring role. And so that's something where matching between mentors and mentees is key. But it just might be that there's a lack of commitment. I guess that could be on both sides. But if you're volunteering to be a mentor for someone, hopefully it's not on the mentor side, but perhaps the mentee has just lost their way. Maybe they're not, it's a sign of a bigger problem. And sometimes people can be very defensive. So they're not very good at taking a direct feedback. And I'm sure there are crossovers here between managing a team. But when it's a one-to-one relationship, it can be more intense. And so we have to take account of some of these things. I have to say that in my experience, this is extremely rare. There are very few times that we've actually had to call a halt on that. And most mentoring relationships become very strong and very positive for both parties, indeed. So there's some more information that we could probably think about how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. And I'm going to put a lot more information of this within the handbook, because I'm also conscious of time, and I know that it's going to be very useful for us to think about and to speak to our guest speaker who's coming up. I think we're roughly about time. Yeah. So there's more sections on feedback, which we'll come back to if we have time today, or I'll include it in tomorrow's session as well. But at this stage, I think we're going to pass over on things to do with on this section of the program now, to welcome one of our guest speakers. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen at the moment, I hope. There we go. And welcome our esteemed guest speaker, Professor Joseph Zund, who's from the Department of Neurology and Global Health, adjunct professor in the Department of Medicine of Infectious Diseases and Epidemiology at the University of Washington. And he's just gone live on our screen, so fantastic. Welcome, Joe. I hope I can call you Joe. That's what you've got on your screen.
Ok, perfecto. Entonces voy a hablar en español, ojalá que me entiendan. Estaba leyendo los comentarios de la lista de participantes y fue muy interesante, y quiero leer algunas. Mercedes Corazo dijo: la mentoría es voluntaria u obligatoria, y quién elige el mentor. Y también una pregunta sería: ¿quién elige el mentoreado? Y otro comentario, Carolina Soto Carrión: ¿cuándo se dice que el mentoreado puede pasar a ser mentor? Y finalmente, José Francisco Parodi: ¿cómo prepararse para que tu mentoreado te quite el trabajo? Entonces, son preguntas muy interesantes, y en mi experiencia también son preguntas que muchas personas tienen, y con esta presentación de hoy voy a hablar sobre mi experiencia en ser un mentoreado para empezar. Y no sé si pueden ver mi flecha, pero voy a anotar mi mentor, King Holmes. Y él fue mentor a varias personas que pueden ver en esta pantalla, y la famosa Patricia García a su lado izquierdo. Y sobre los años he empezado o aprendido cómo hacer mentor también. Entonces es un proceso a veces difícil, pero lo que voy a hablar de hoy es cómo ser un mentoreado, y también cómo convertirse en un mentor. Entonces, ojalá que todo estará grabada para que ustedes puedan leerlo con tiempo en el futuro. Entonces, para empezar, voy a hablar sobre qué debe hacer un mentor, cómo sacar el máximo provecho de su mentor, y un punto clave, creo, yo creo que hay una mayoría de ustedes que a veces piensan que son impostores o fraudes. Entonces es un síndrome que es muy pesado, y si sabe que tiene este síndrome, hay cosas que puede hacer para hacerlo un poco menos pesado. Y finalmente, cómo convertirse en un mentor y aprender a ser un líder, porque ustedes, como saben o no, son el futuro, al menos los que no son viejos como mí. como yo. Y la próxima. Entonces, eso es solamente una vista de mi carrera, como empecé en colegio y la universidad. Y estoy mostrándoles esta foto porque quiero mostrarles que tenía varios mentores sobre los años y la relación entre yo y mis mentores ha cambiado sobre los años, pero todavía estoy en contacto con la mayoría. Entonces, es algo que deben pensar en que su relación con su mentor puede seguir por muchos años y eso podría afectar su interés en escoger a un mentor. Con respecto a mi cronología, empecé en el Perú cuando era un fellow en enfermedades infecciosas y yo y mi esposa y mi niño de 7 meses, Andresito, estábamos en Perú en 96 y ya los niños se fueron al nido y son adultos. Pero sobre los años tenemos un dicho que se dice alphabet soup o sopa de alfabeta cuando referimos a las becas del NIH, de nuestro Instituto Nacional de Salud. Entonces, sobre los años he tenido la buena suerte de tener una variedad de becas que me ha ayudado a ser un investigador y también asistir a la próxima generación de los mentoreados. Y con respecto a capacitando a los mentores y mentoreados, hemos estado trabajando desde casi más de 10 años con una variedad de universidades en el Perú. Hemos ido a Lima, por supuesto, a Arequipa, a Iquitos también para hacer unas reuniones sobre cómo ser un mentor y cómo ser un mentoreado. Y con respecto a los factores importantes, no voy a discutir todos los factores, pero son factores importantes. Voy a tocar en algunos durante esta presentación, pero también ustedes pueden leer este artículo que es muy interesante. Pero en mi experiencia, lo más importante es comunicación y comunicación sobre expectativas. Expectativas por el mentoreado, expectativas por el mentor también, porque tiene que tener como una alianza entre las expectativas para tener lo mejor chance de ser exitoso. Con respecto a las características ideales de los mentores, hay 3. Ustedes quieren tener un mentor que es competente, no quieres un idiota, alguien que puede confiar o está confiado, alguien que está cometido a su éxito en el futuro. Y cuando he hecho esta presentación en el pasado, mencioné este otro C que se llama click. Y en este momento había una telenovela donde el click fue un click romántico. Entonces, favor a evitar este click romántico con su mentor, pero yo creo que eso pasa de vez en cuando, pero ojalá que no tan frecuente. Pero el click en este sentido es el click que quiere trabajar con este mentor, que es una persona en que puede confiar, una persona que no tiene este miedo que va a quitar su trabajo, pero está allá para ayudarle y podría ser en el futuro una colega, realizando que a veces es difícil. Fue para mí también llamar a mi mentor como su primer nombre, King, pero sobre tiempo podría convertirse en una colega. Entonces, otra cosa que yo creo que es importante es, deben pensar los mentoreados en un equipo mentorial. Entonces, de repente va a tener un mentor principal. Esta persona va a asistirle en los detalles día a día en su trabajo, pero también necesita pensar en un mentor temático. Entonces, por ejemplo, yo soy neurólogo, no soy epidemiólogo, ni soy experto en cosas de laboratorio. Entonces, cuando yo tengo un mentor como Mario Conejo, que está en la lista de participantes de hoy, él es experto en genético y yo no soy esta persona. Entonces, yo puedo, o en el pasado he hecho ayuda a Mario en cómo hacer la investigación en términos largos. Pero él necesitaba también un mentor que tiene experiencia en laboratorio, más experiencia que yo en la epidemiología y metodología de hacer los análisis genéticos. Entonces, ustedes deben pensar en escoger un grupo de personas que aumenten su capacidad en las áreas necesarias para que ustedes tengan éxito. Con respecto a lo que debe hacer un mentor, y es un poco oscuro el cambio de un mentoreado a un mentor. Entonces, creo que representa esta oscuridad en mis diapositivas, porque voy a hablar sobre el rol de mentoreado y el rol de un mentor más o menos a la vez, porque ustedes, algunos de ustedes, van a convertirse en mentor sobre tiempo. No hay una persona usualmente que va a escogerle como un mentor, y en mi experiencia, mi mentor King me ha dicho que soy mentor cuando él no tenía tiempo para asistir a un mentoreado. Entonces, la manera en que va a convertirse en un mentor es un poco oscuro, pero debe tomar en cuenta que hay unos factores que debe tener para ser un mentor exitoso. Entonces, en mi experiencia, un mentor debe presentar el mentoreado a sus colegas, los colegas importantes que tienen algo que hacer con sus intereses, pero también al interno de investigación, a las personas del laboratorio, a los epidemiólogos y otras cositas. Y también ser disponible para dar consejos sobre los protocolos de investigación, sobre los artículos científicos. Eso es algo que puede seguir por años. Yo estoy como parte de unos equipos de investigación que empezó hace como más de 10 años antes. Entonces, es un rol que podría tener por unos años, pero el mentor bueno debe estar disponible, y disponible es la palabra clave, porque un mentor dañino o un mentor que a veces no quiere o no debe escoger es un mentor que no tiene tiempo. Y yo sé que hay un montón de científicos exitosos que no tienen tiempo. Y aquí, si tiene un mentor que no tiene tiempo, no vale la pena, porque no puede darle consejo, no ayuda. Entonces, eso es un factor, un mentor que te evitan. Creo que es obvio que no necesita, no quiere un mentor que te eviten o que no te apoyen o que te bloqueen. Y creo que eso es un punto clave que mencioné a José Francisco. Creo que algunos mentores tienen este miedo que el mentoreado va a sacar su trabajo. Y eso es como una danza a veces, como el mentoreado quiere ver cómo va a desarrollar su carrera, y si la relación entre mentor y mentoreado está bien, el mentor empezar a ser una guía también para asistirle en encontrar un puesto, de repente en un campo parecido a lo que está mentoreado, pero a veces en otro campo. Pero yo entiendo que a veces o varias veces hay este miedo. Y también voy a mencionar que no quieren un mentor que solo te hacen críticas negativas. No es un buen factor. Entonces, ¿cómo establecer una relación? Creo que, como mencioné antes, hay las expectativas mutuas. Entonces, el mentor tiene sus expectativas y ustedes, como mentoreados, deben tener también sus expectativas y debe tener también una confianza que sus expectativas va a ser bien para la relación y que el mentor va a asistirle en llegar a completar las expectativas. Y como ustedes ya saben, la mayoría de nuestras interacciones internacionales ahora son por esta manera de cosa virtual. Yo creo que el proceso, el programa de Zoom y WhatsApp son maravillas. Y con esos programas es mucho más fácil hablar con nuestros mentoreados, hacer este tipo de conferencia, pero yo sé que también es difícil porque es diferente. Pero con esta diferencia y no sabemos cuándo va a terminar esta pandemia, tenemos que seguir. Y en mi experiencia también los mentoreados que tienen lo máximo chance de ser bien mentoreado son los que me contacten por correo electrónico o por WhatsApp para programar una llamada por Zoom, porque si eres un mentor bueno, debe programar reuniones con sus mentoreados y estar disponible. Es posible que no es el mismo día, pero en la próxima semana, pero debe estar disponible para sus mentoreados y hacerlo por Zoom. En mi experiencia es un poco más fácil en vez de programar una reunión en persona, porque como ustedes ven, estoy en mi sótano ahorita, entonces puedo hacer reuniones por algún parte del mundo ahora por Zoom. Con respecto a las expectativas, y cómo estoy para el tiempo, tengo como 10 minutos más. Definir las expectativas. Entonces, deben pensar en la frecuencia de reuniones, los recursos necesarios para hacer su investigación, como mencioné antes, los tipos de colaboradores que necesita también. Entonces, necesita un epidemiólogo, necesita un experto en laboratorio y de repente eso es lo más importante en mi experiencia, autoría de manuscritos. Eso es un punto para muchos conflictos entre mentor y mentoreado hace los años. Entonces, es importante, en mi experiencia, importante empezar su discusión con cada experimento o cada ensayo clínico que tiene una expectativa bien definida sobre la autoría. Y yo sé que a veces es difícil porque, como ustedes saben, ser el primer autor o el último autor llevan un poco más peso cuando estamos hablando de su carrera. Entonces ahora hay un cambio chiquitito, pero el primer autor ahora se puede dividir en dos. Entonces pueden aceptar a dos autores primarios, que es nuevo, y solamente se hace en algunas revistas, pero es algo que tomar en cuenta. Pero ustedes saben que cuando está en una jerárquica bien rígida, es a veces difícil decir a su Chief of Service, su colega que no estaba involucrado en la investigación, que no debe figurar en la lista de autores. Pero ahora más y más hay reglas publicadas que puede usar para referir a sus colegas con esta idea que debe ser autor, aunque no ha participado en la investigación. Podría mostrarle la regla científica reconocido por el mundo científico que debe estar involucrado en este para figurar como autor. Y creo que es una discusión a veces que necesita tener con su mentor también, porque especialmente para los mentoreados jóvenes, difícil hablar con su jefe y decir que no va a figurar como autor. Entonces, a favor hablar con su mentor para tener, para programar esta discusión si ustedes encuentran este problema en el futuro. También voy a mencionar que a veces el programa que le apoya va a tener sus necesidades también con respecto a las expectativas. Por ejemplo, yo tengo una beca que está en stroke y entonces puedo apoyar a personas interesadas en stroke, pero no en dolores de la cabeza, por ejemplo. Y también algo que debe pensar es no solamente en sus carreras profesionales, pero también su vida personal, porque solamente tiene una vida, al menos que hay unos gatos en esta lista de participantes, pero tiene una vida personal y solamente una vida, entonces debe vivir su vida a la vez que está en la investigación. Entonces, ¿cómo afinar los objetivos de investigación? He puesto este círculo de cositas solamente para que pueda pensar en todas las áreas y mostrar que es difícil encontrar un mentor que tiene la experiencia en todas las áreas. Y a veces necesita, como mencioné, un experto en análisis de data, por ejemplo. Y yo sé que ustedes han hablado sobre este plan de desarrollo individual. En nuestra experiencia es importante también, no voy a mencionarlo más sobre los detalles, pero quiero mostrar que eso en mi experiencia también es útil y voy a mencionar también acá el goal 3. Las metas personales. Entonces, para nosotros, para nuestros mentoreados, estamos pidiendo que hablamos sobre sus metas profesionales, educacionales y personales para que podremos tener una idea de su vida personal también. Y con respecto a los objetivos potenciales, eso es una lista y otra vez, ojalá que está grabada esta presentación para que puedan leer la lista más tarde. Pero en mi experiencia, lo más importante es cómo escribir un artículo. Cómo empezar con los datos de un estudio y convertirlo en un manuscrito. Cómo tomar los datos de un estudio y empezar a escribir una beca, porque si no ha hecho un artículo, no ha escrito una beca, la primera vez es a veces un desastre. Entonces, por este rol necesita un mentor para guiarle, para hacer redacciones, para hacer consejos y poco a poco va a convertirse en autor y puede entonces en este momento ayudar a la próxima generación también. Con respecto a cómo monitorear el progreso, solamente voy a mencionar que el proceso o la relación mentoreado-mentor es algo que cambia sobre los años y debe estar en comunicación con sus mentores por varias maneras. Podría ser reuniones en persona, en nuestra experiencia tener estas obras en curso o works in progress. Es muy útil porque si tiene un grupo de mentoreados y un grupo de mentores y los mentoreados hablan de sus proyectos, los mentoreados pueden ver que todos, o no todos, pero a veces los otros mentoreados enfrentan los mismos problemas y pueden hablar sobre cómo sobrevivir los problemas, cómo tener un éxito cuando está pensando en, por ejemplo, un estudio en el campo y, por ejemplo, cómo enrolar una población difícil o una población bien marginalizada. De repente sus colegas tienen unas ideas de cómo hacerlo que fue exitoso. Entonces, tener las obras en curso, yo creo que es ideal para intercambiar las ideas de cómo hacer la investigación y todos pueden aprender en esta manera. Con respecto a mantener las conexiones, solamente voy a decir que hay varias maneras de hacerlo. El teléfono creo que es algo viejo que casi nada usa teléfono en este momento. En mi experiencia, el correo electrónico es muy útil, pero yo sé que hay algunas personas que prefieren usar el WhatsApp y nunca va a su correo electrónico. Entonces, eso refiere también a la discusión entre mentoreado y mentor al principio de la relación, cómo quiere ser contactado. Entonces, ¿es por correo electrónico? ¿Es por WhatsApp? Me imagino que no es por teléfono, pero deben definir cómo contactar a su mentor. Y si no contesta su primer correo electrónico, ¿qué debe hacer? Otro correo electrónico, un WhatsApp, pero debe tener un plan para hacer contacto con su mentor. Y eso parece como Paloma, hija de Patty, pero no es el elefante en la sala. Entonces, sabemos que hay un síndrome de impostor o fraude. Y es increíble que se dice que hasta 70% de los investigadores y un porcentaje bien alto, especialmente en mujeres científicas en países como América Latina, tiene este cosita que se llama imposter syndrome. Y puede ser bien pesado porque si piensa que eres un imposter, puede paralizarle. Entonces, eso es una lista de preguntas. No es para deprimirles, pero es para ver cuando ustedes contestan. No voy a leer cada pregunta, pero ustedes pueden leer esta lista más tarde y ver si a veces tiene este síndrome. Y voy a también hablar sobre lo que puede hacer para disminuir este factor, porque creo que es un factor que es bien difícil eliminar, pero es posible disminuir. Solamente voy a mencionar la última pregunta. ¿Vives con miedo de ser descubierta o desenmascarada? Y yo tenía este síndrome también. Entonces, creo que cada persona algún tiempo tiene este miedo de ser descubierta porque no tiene la capacidad de hacer su trabajo o no debe tener su trabajo porque no está capacitado para este. Entonces, debe tomar en cuenta esta lista para más tarde. Entonces, este síndrome del impostor también viene con este síndrome de perfeccionismo. Entonces, viene mano a mano. altamente asociado con este síndrome es el perfeccionismo, la percepción de la necesidad de ser el mentor o el mejor, a veces el mentor, pero con respecto a esta percepción, es difícil porque si piensa que tiene que ser perfecto, entonces a veces está paralizada y no puede empezar porque no piensa que va a seguir con las cosas perfectas, entonces no va a empezar al principio. Y puede llevar a angustia también, a depresión y entonces, es un factor que deben tomar en serio cuando está pensando en su mismo, pero también en sus mentoreados cuando eres mentor. ¿Cómo superar este síndrome? Es un proceso, entonces no es posible como encender una luz. Es un proceso. Necesita empezar en celebrar sus victorias. Entonces, cuando tiene una solicitud al comité de ética que fue aceptado o que fue sometido, entonces debe darse crédito y celebra victoria. Y también cuando acaba de enrolar el primer paciente en un estudio o envía un manuscrito a la revista. Entonces es algo que debe celebrar. También, en mi experiencia, este factor, el segundo, crear un equipo de soporte bien importante. Entonces, para los jóvenes, deben tener como una red de compañeros, compañeros que tienen el mismo sitio, mejor todavía. Entonces, algunos colegas que tienen interés en investigación y ustedes pueden discutir dónde están y empoderar ustedes y también pueden compartir sus metas también. Y finalmente, casi cada persona que tiene este síndrome tiene también los pensamientos negativos. Es como una persona mala, hablando malas cosas sobre lo que está haciendo. Entonces, debe convertirle en una mala cosita que habla cosas malas a una persona que habla solo o la mayoría de comentarios que son positivos. Entonces, es algo que se llama autorreflexión positiva. Yo creo que es algo que puede buscar por Google o YouTube cómo hacer este tipo de cambio en sus pensamientos. Pero si está pensando bueno en su mismo, va a tener mucho más éxito en combatir este síndrome. Finalmente voy a hablar sobre cómo convertirse en un mentor. Hay beneficios de la tutoría o mentoría para el mentor, para personas como yo. Capacitar a la próxima generación de mentoreados es un gusto, porque yo puedo ver el gusto en sus ojos cuando llegue a tener un proyecto exitoso, cuando publica su primer manuscrito. Y también tengo algo que me alegra mucho a ver el desarrollo de la capacidad de investigación, no solamente en los mentoreados, pero cuando el mentoreado tiene su propia red de mentoreados y cuando la investigación está más fuerte en las instituciones en que está trabajando. Para el aprendiz o para el mentoreado, ustedes ya saben los factores que mencioné antes. Hace unos años tuvimos un ensayo sobre esta pregunta. ¿Qué quieren los mentores en el Perú? Y eso fue la primera vez que he escuchado la palabra retroalimentación. Entonces estaba un poco confundido, pero ahora entiendo. Retroalimentación. Y creo que fue el esposo de la doctora Patti García César Cárcamo que me ha mencionado esta palabra. Entonces, ustedes necesitan retroalimentación de los becados y colegas, cómo mejorar la mentoría. Entonces, después de tener unas reuniones con su mentoreado, puede tener esta pregunta también durante una reunión. ¿Cómo están las cosas? ¿Qué puedo hacer mejor? ¿Qué son las cosas que debo eliminar a veces? Y la segunda cosita, reconocimiento, eso es bien difícil. En nuestra institución, finalmente, hay un reconocimiento en solamente una escuela para ser mentor. Si eres un mentor de una persona en su año de maestría, al final recibe una bolsa, un pago monetario para esta ayuda. Pero yo creo que sobre los años está más reconocido por las instituciones que el ser mentor es importante y requieren que pone este reconocimiento de su experiencia en su currículo también. El número de mentoreados, dónde están sus mentoreados, qué tipo de éxito tenía sus mentoreados, son, por ejemplo, investigadores por sí mismo o están encargados de un programa, cosas así. Y finalmente, aprecio. Entonces, ¿qué tipo de aprecio quieren los mentores? Yo creo que el acceso a literatura electrónica es de oro. Entonces, si hay una manera de brindar este acceso a literatura electrónica, eso puede fortalecer la ciencia en tantas maneras para el mentor, para el mentoreado, para los estudiantes, para el instituto. Entonces, cosas para tomar en cuenta. Otra cosa que se puede hacer, eso es un grupo que trabaja de mentoreados y se llama Peer Mentoring Group. Entonces, es un poco como tener un grupo para Works in Progress, un grupo para evitar este síndrome de imposter, pero ustedes concentran en un tema cada semana y hablan de este tema. Y es ningún costo para hacerlo, solamente necesita el deseo de tener un peer mentoring group. Si ustedes tienen interés, yo estoy alegre para ponerse en contacto con unas personas encargadas de este grupo para tener más aviso. Y con respecto a la incertidumbre de esta pandemia, yo creo que para todos es difícil, como ustedes saben, para los mentores, para los mentoreados, para las personas que tienen familia, para las familias que tienen niños o no están en la escuela. Entonces, es horrible para todos. Y si tiene esta cosita en mente, yo creo que puede tomar estos consejos y usarlos para mejorar su experiencia durante este tiempo. Entonces, para mí lo más importante es los check-ins. Entonces, no sabemos cómo están los mentoreados si no tenemos una conversación de vez en cuando. Entonces, deben programar un check-in de vez en cuando para tener una idea de cómo están las emociones, cómo ajustar las normas, porque en esta pandemia las normas establecidas no son normales. Entonces es normal ahora que no va a enrolar pacientes en unos estudios con la frecuencia de antes, no va a tener tiempo para hacer las cosas que ha hecho en el pasado. Y finalmente voy a mencionar también al final, concentrarse en lo que es importante. Comer y dormir bien. Yo sé que al menos en Gringolandia el porcentaje de personas que está tomando mucho alcohol está aumentando y si vive en un estado donde está el legalizado el marihuana, el uso de marihuana está subiendo también durante la pandemia y eso puede paralizarse. Entonces, sí puede tomar una cerveza de vez en cuando con su ¿cómo se llama? Su comida, pero tomarlo en cuenta que es un problema a veces. Pero tiene sus conexiones sociales también en manera que está segura y vamos a sobrevivir este tiempo duro. La mentoría, cómo cambia durante la pandemia. Voy a decir solamente una cosita. Manténgase real. Entonces, como ustedes pueden ver, yo estoy en mi sótano ahorita. Soy profesor, pero no importa. Estamos en la pandemia juntos y yo creo que juntos es la única manera que vamos a sobrevivir la pandemia. Somos seres humanos y estamos acá en este mundo para compartir nuestras fortalezas y nuestros problemas también. Entonces, ojalá juntos podremos salir más fuerte. Y finalmente, siempre quiero salir con este asunto de cómo equilibrar la familia con una carrera de salud global. Voy a decir un chiste ahora. Al principio mencioné a mi colega peruano que mi esposa me ha dicho que yo puedo tener hasta 30 días al año para viajar a las conferencias, para viajar al Perú, porque tuvimos este jovencito y después tuvimos dos jovencitos. Y entonces mencioné que mi esposa me ha dado permiso para viajar 30 días, pero si viajo con mi familia, no cuenta contra mis 30 días. Y mi colega peruano me dijo que si usted viaje con su familia, debe recibir unos días extra. Es una broma, es una familia querida, por supuesto, pero una broma que me gusta. Entonces, es importante tomar en cuenta que sus niños, si tiene gusto de tener niños o una familia, van a seguir creciendo y no importa si está involucrado en la ciencia o no. Entonces, debe tomar tiempo para disfrutar su familia, también de sus éxitos en la ciencia a la vez. Y ojalá que al final va a salir este mundo con un sentido de tranquilidad y estar alegre que estaba en este mundo. Eso es un poco deprimido para terminar esta presentación, pero ojalá que esta presentación fue útil para los mentoreados, igual para los mentores. Y si ustedes tienen preguntas, encantado contestarles. Voy a quitar este stop share y ver si hay unas preguntas. No sé si tengo tiempo. Yo sé que ustedes tienen otro.
Muchas gracias, Joe. We're running. Maybe I need about 2 minutes at the end, so maybe 5 minutes for questions. I think there are lots of questions coming through, so I don't know how we pick out the best ones or the most popular ones. But there have been concerns about how the different phases of mentoring happen, and how you know when it's coming to an end and you stop being a mentor and become colleagues, and how difficult that is.
Ujú.
I wonder if you have
Sí,
any
eso
comments
es
on that.
una pregunta que estaba pensando en esta pregunta hace años y todavía es difícil contestarla, porque yo creo que el cambio es algo que no es como una persona toca a su puerta y dice, mire, eres un mentor. A veces sí pasa cuando ahora soy mentor, los mentoreados o las personas que quieren ser mentoreados me contactan por correo y piden si yo puedo ser su mentor. Y una cosita que no mencioné, que quiero mencionar ahora, es que yo sé que como soy neurólogo, no hay muchos neurólogos en la investigación, al menos en mi instituto. Pero si hay una persona, por ejemplo, que es un endocrinólogo, que quiere entrar al mundo de investigación global, entonces yo puedo tener una reunión con esta persona con el conocimiento que yo no voy a ser su mentor, pero yo tengo un network que tiene varios mentores y de repente hay un endocrinólogo y yo puedo presentar este mentoreado a esta persona y entonces es una conversación que la persona llegue al endocrinólogo y yo creo que la presentación que yo hago es algo que puede abrir la puerta también, porque si esta persona, well, si esta persona no sabía que había este endocrinólogo, no va a contactarle, pero a veces las personas ponen como lo hace un poco más difícil contactarle, al menos que hay una presentación oficial o no tan oficial, podría ser correo electrónico. En mi experiencia, la manera en que he convertido a un mentor, mi mentor King me ha dado un libro que el título fue How to be a Mentor, cómo hacer mentoría. Y eso fue, entonces me ha dicho que ahora eres mentor y fue algo raro, pero yo creo que ustedes van a ver cómo está involucrado en la investigación, que siempre hay una generación más joven que ustedes. Entonces podría ser un estudiante de la universidad, podría ser a veces un estudiante de colegio que tiene algo que brilla en sus ojos y puede ver que esta persona me gusta y esta persona puede tener éxito en la investigación y a veces empieza con dar consejos a esta persona y poco a poco convierte en una relación mentor-mentoreado. Y entonces es un proceso oscuro, como mencioné. Con respecto a cómo cambia esta relación sobre los años, eso también difícil contestar para mí. No recuerdo cuando tenía la confianza de llamar a mi mentor, que antes fue el Dr. Holmes, King, pero fue un momento cuando era mi amigo y mi colega. Y yo creo que podría ser, no recuerdo bien, pero podría ser que él me mencioné que no necesita llamarme doctor, no necesita llamarme profesor. Entonces, a veces, cuando los mentores en la lista de participantes piensan que la relación entre tú y tu mentoreado es un poco más, ¿cómo se llama? Más concreto, tiene más confianza en que su mentoreado está independiente, puede decir a su mentoreado, mire, no necesita llamarme al doctor, aunque todavía yo he hablado con mis residentes y yo les dije que pueden llamarme a Joe, pero siguen a llamarme Dr. Zunt. Ojalá que eso es un poco una ayuda para
Yeah.
la pregunta.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. I want to thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm sure we could go on and on and on. So again, I can't thank you enough there. So we're coming to the end of today. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. It's a fascinating insight into a particular type of mentoring within a medical health department, and every mentoring relationship within different types of departments will be different. But I'm sure you'll agree that was fantastic, and I will contact Professor Sunt after this and thank him again.
Una cosita, si ustedes pueden mandarme la lista de preguntas en el chat, yo puedo intentar contestar algunas que no tenía tiempo contestar. Gracias.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Someone will be capturing those, I'm sure, and we can do that. Yeah. So just to say before we go, as we're getting close to the end of our time, please can you again complete the short feedback sessions. We've tried to take into account some of the feedback that comes in each day and try and adjust if we can. So if you can all do that, and it's very useful for us to keep feedback on all of these sessions as well as the overall course. So thank you, if you would please do that. And you'll be pleased to know, I guess, that we're going to send you a couple of documents after this session, but there's no work. And you don't need to complete anything or do anything, but I hope that they're of interest. And I've given an example of a transcription of a conversation, of 2 different conversations which demonstrate good listening and poor listening. And I think how you can approach exactly the same problem and the difference that your approach can make. And also a very short handout on questioning and useful questions in mentoring. But it'll be a very light reading, I'm sure, for most of you. So there's no work or anything to complete or send back or anything after that for this evening. And I hope to see everyone tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to look at particularly about skills development. And we'll pick up a little bit on the individual development plan that Joe mentioned, and some more examples of that and how they can be useful as well in terms of as a tool for skills development. So that's a really useful presentation we have had today, and we have another guest tomorrow from University of California, San Francisco, who is also going to. So I hope you've enjoyed the day. There's so much interesting stuff going on in the chat. I'm having to translate and try and keep up. And I'm going to spend some time in my evening here to go through some of that as well. So thank you so much for engaging so brilliantly during the day, during these sessions. And I hope that you are getting something out of it and that this will be taken forward. And see you all again tomorrow morning, and enjoy the rest of your day. Is there anything anyone else needs? There should be a link, I think, for the feedback, for the short feedback quiz within the chat section, I hope. So I'm going to just stop sharing. There we go. Yay. It looks like the link has just gone up in the chat. So if I could get people just to take a few minutes and complete that. We do look at them in the evening, so it's for me it's the evening. So thank you very much, and hasta mañana. Mañana de mañana.
Hasta mañana.